So good evening, everybody. My name is Kelly Pork. I'm with Lakeland Agricultural Research Association. I'm really happy to have Dallas Mount with us. He's the owner of Ranch Management Consultants. He's home of the Ranching for Profit School. He's worked with hundreds of ranchers all across US, Canada, and Australia. So he farms in Wyoming near Wheatland. He's focused on creating profitable businesses with healthy land and happy families. So I'm very happy for him to join us tonight and talk a little bit about maybe winter grazing for profit versus ranching for profit. But I'll turn it over to you. If everybody would like to put their questions, type them in to the Q&A during the webinar as well as in the chat. We will definitely have lots of time at the end to answer. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. If you'll keep an eye on that chat for me, if there's ones you think would be appropriate to jump in the middle while we're going, please do that. For sure. So I don't mind being interrupted here as we go. So let me get the screen brought up here. Give me a second to do my clicks here, whatever it takes, and we'll get her rocking and rolling. Looks like I need to swap these two. There we go. Does that look all right, Kelly? Give me a thumbs up if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, works.
Cool. Good. All right. Okay. Yeah, appreciate you guys having me on. Looking forward to visiting with you tonight. I was asked to present about an hour and a half of material and then have some Q&A discussion. So that's what we'll plan to do here. I really look forward to the discussion part and being able to interact with you guys. So I'll give you some things here to get your mind going around winter grazing and ranching for profit in a broader sense. But we'll focus on some of the winter grazing stuff as we go and kind of lay the groundwork here for why I think the winter grazing piece in the running a profitable ranch is so important based on the things that I've seen in my experiences. So just a quick bit about us, just so you know kind of where I'm coming from on these things. We do a couple things. We teach the Ranching for Profit School. I'm guessing some of you on the call have probably been to the school. The school is a 7-day business management school for people in agriculture. And we do about 12 of those a year across the US and Canada now. We're excited to be back in Canada again. And that's one of the things we do. The second thing we do is a program called Executive Link. So Executive Link, or EL, as we call it for short. EL is based on the idea that when you're self-employed, you work for a lunatic. And we say you work for a lunatic because that lunatic lets you do the things that you enjoy and the things that you're good at, while not necessarily making sure that you're doing the things that need to be done in your business, right? So many of us as small business owners, and I include myself in that, we like to let ourselves work on the things that we enjoy. And oftentimes those things that we enjoy are not the things that really move the needle in our business, so to speak. So the EL, what we do in EL is we put businesses on boards of directors for each other. They meet 3 times a year. They look inside each other's business to identify strategic level things that they should be doing, and then hold each other accountable to that. So we've got several businesses from Canada that are in our EL program. We do not have a chapter that meets in Canada yet. But we have quite a few people that travel down to the States to join us in that. So those are the 2 things our company does, are Ranching for Profit and this is just a snapshot of the businesses that we worked with from October of 2022 to just a few weeks ago, when we kind of wrapped up our last winter season Ranching for Profit School. So it's a pretty good swath of cattle country. And obviously, we're excited to be back in Canada and had a school in Okotoks, just south of Calgary there, and had quite a few. I think we had 48 in the class. So the dots you see that look like the little arrows pointing in are the Canadian businesses that came to that school in Okotoks. So we'll be going back there again in late November. So looking forward to doing that again. But we get to work with people all the way from Mexico, all the way up through. So see a variety of environments, a variety of different challenges. And, you hear everybody always say, well, ranching in my environment's unique and you wouldn't understand the challenges we face. And what we find across, this fairly broad geographic range is there's a lot of similarities in the things that create challenges for running and managing a profitable ranch. And so we're going to touch on some of those things tonight and dive into them and talk about what we can do to manage them. So, I want to start with some economics, and I want to do this first of all while you guys are fresh, and but then I think it's going to lay a good foundation to dive into a deeper discussion around grazing, particularly winter grazing, and why that's so important. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to run a gross margin on an example cow herd. So the 3 steps to do that are to number one, calculate gross product, and gross product is the value of production. Okay, so I think when we say gross product, I want you to think my total value that I've produced. Now it's different from gross revenue, okay? Because you might keep them instead of sell them, right? So if we produced heifer calves, those heifer calves are part of our gross product, but we might choose to keep them in our herd instead of sell them, okay? When we think of gross product, value of production, the easiest way to think about gross product, I think, is thinking of it like a set of steer calves, like a set of stocker steers that we're going to buy in the spring and sell in the fall. Okay. So let's say I went out and bought $100,000 worth of steer calves in the spring. Okay. And then I ran those for the summertime. Let's say I ran them for 5 months, and then I sold them as fall's coming on. Okay. And when I gathered up the ones that were alive and sold them, I got $120,000 for everything that I sold. So I paid $100,000. I sold them for $120,000. What was the value that I produced? Okay. It was the $20,000. I added $20,000 in value by grazing them that summer. Okay. Some of them died, so some of that value went away. But then most of them got bigger, right? So I produced value. So that's an example in stocker steers. But for cows and things like that, we're going to dive into how to do gross product, because it's a little bit more complicated in a cow herd. Okay, so that's calculating gross product. So that's be step number 1. We're going to do that together. Step number 2 is total our direct cost. Okay, so our direct costs are any costs that increase proportionally as the units of production increase. Okay, so we'll total those costs. Gross margin is simply gross product minus direct cost. Okay, so once we've done step 1 and 2, we just take the gross product, subtract out the direct cost, and that's our gross margin. Okay, the gross margin. So it's essentially, think of this as gross margin is return to overheads and labor and management. Okay, so gross margin, it measures what is this enterprise returning to the overheads of the business. Okay, overheads are going to be things like land and labor primarily. Okay, so land cost and labor cost. And labor cost includes not only the cost of people, but also the things people use, right? The plant, the machinery, all those kind of things that go into the business. Okay, so that's what we're going to walk through together. So let's dive in. You might enjoy kind of writing this down with us as we go. You're welcome to watch. I'm just going to do some writing on the screen here as we go. But you guys might enjoy, if you have a blank piece of paper in front of you, I think this might make more sense to just write it along as we go. So gross product, let's remind this first. How did we define gross product? Okay, if you remember right, it was the value of production. Okay, I've got terrible handwriting and it's hard to write on the screen sometimes, so bear with me. If you can't read something or you lose where I came up with a number, holler it out in the chat, okay? All right, so we're going to calculate gross product for 100 cows. Okay, now let's back up in time a little bit. Let's start these cows in the fall, right after they've been preg checked. Okay, so we just ran these cows through the chute in the fall after we weaned the calves. These cows are now confirmed pregnant, so 100 cows that are pregnant. Okay, and we're going to run these cows for a 12-month period and calculate the value that they produce. Okay, so there's some things we have to think through, and we're going to say we're doing this as projections. Okay, so we've got these cows we just pregged in the fall, and we're going to say if we ran them for another year, what do we think they might do? Okay, so we're just going to take guesses in terms of this herd performance. So if I started with 100 cows, how many of these cows might die? Okay, I wish I had all you guys in a room so you could holler these things out to me, but I'll just give you what maybe my guesses are. And they're probably going to be different from the way your herd performs. So I'm going to say 2. I'm going to say 2 deads. Okay. So we got 2 dead cows, and those cows just become buzzard food. They're gone. Okay. How many of these cows might not wean a calf? Okay, so we got 100 pregnant cows. There's going to be a handful of them that are not going to wean a calf. So let's say those 2 died before they weaned a calf. And then let's say we're going to have some that are going to maybe slough in the winter. We're going to have some that are going to lose a calf at calving time, probably going on right now for many of you. We're going to have some that lose a calf between calving and weaning. Okay, so when we add up all those, maybe there's going to be 6. Okay, I'm going to say 6, and we're going to call these dries. Okay, when these walk into if we kept them that long, when these walk into the weaning pen, they're going to be dry cows. Okay, and maybe what we'll do is we'll gather these up at branding time, right? And sell them at branding. So before we even turn them out for summer grass. Okay, so 6 dries. And so now we're at preg check again in the fall. How many of these cows might you call even if they're pregnant? Okay, so these are going to be cows that are too old, bad bag, bad eye, bad foot, bad disposition, your lumps, your bumps. I'm going to say maybe another 4. Okay, so 4 culls, ones that I'm going to cull even if they're pregnant. Okay, and then the last one would be how many of these cows are going to come in the following fall as open cows. Okay, and let's say I'm going to say here another 12. Okay, your numbers might be different than these. Another 12 opens. Okay, maybe that's a little high. Maybe I'll run it down to 10. 10 opens. Okay, it's supposed to be a 10. There we go. Okay, so there is my herd performance right there. So I've thought through a year's worth of herd performance. Okay, so I can take this data now and I can calculate out my gross product. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to sell. Some of these cows are going to be sold, right? I don't get to sell those 2, but I get to sell those 6, those 4, and those 10. Okay, I'm going to lump all these together. They might bring a little bit different prices, but I'm just going to say I've got 20 cull cows. Okay, and let's say they're going to bring. Your guys are with Canadian dollar. And so I'll probably add about 20% to 20 to 30% to most of my numbers I'm looking at. So let's say they bring $1,100. Okay, you guys can call me out if you think my numbers are way too optimistic or pessimistic. Okay, $1,100 times 20 is $22,000 for those cows. Okay. All right, so I sold those cows and got $22,000 for them. Now, how many calves do I have to sell? Okay, so these 2 did not wean a calf, and those 6 did not wean a calf. Okay, so I've got 8 that did not wean a calf. So that means I've got 92 calves. And let's just say for simple sake that we're going to sell all of our calves. Okay, and we're going to lump steers and heifers together. And what are they going to be worth? How about we say it's good. Look, things are looking pretty good. $1,500. Is that too high? Okay. Somebody wants to call me out on some of these, throw it in the chat box. Not sure what your markets are. Is $1,500 too high for weaned calves in the fall? Canadian dollars? Times 1,500. 138,000. I haven't seen anybody put something in there that says it's too high. Okay, 138,000. Where'd you get 92 calves from? Thank you. Okay, we started with 100 pregnant cows. 2 cows died before they weaned a calf. And then I've got 6 dry cows. So I've got the 2 plus the 6 is the 8. 8 minus 100 is 92. Okay. So I'm assuming if I started with 100 pregnant cows in the fall, that weaning 92 calves might be reasonable. So, yeah, if I weaned 192 calves at $1,500, that's $138,000 if I sold all those calves. Okay. Now, when we calculate gross product, and I'll call it here GP equals sales minus purchases. Okay. That's our formula for gross product. So I've got my total sales now, right? I've got my cull cows and I've got my calves. So I'm going to total up my sales. Okay, so I've got my 138 plus my 22,000. Okay, that's $160,000 in sales. $160,000 in sales. Now, I need to do some purchases. Okay, I need to get this. If I'm going to evaluate the gross product of this cow herd, then I need to start and end with my same inventories. So we need to buy back enough animals to get me back to my initial starting point. Okay, so you see here, I went down by 22 cows. I sold 20 of them and I had 2 deads. Okay, so we need to purchase. I'm going to write this up here in this corner here because I'm starting to run out of room. Okay, we'll just box off a spot. There we go. So we need to purchase 22 bred animals to get us back to 100 cows. Okay. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't keep your heifers and you should purchase. We're just looking at this economically. Okay. If you keep your own, it's essentially the same as buying them. You're just buying them from yourself. Okay. But in this case, we're going out and we're purchasing 22 to get ourselves back to those 100. So 22 bred animals on today's price. Let's do like a young bred cow or even a bred heifer. Maybe if I took my numbers and converted to yours, what if I said $2,200? Okay, if we're selling opens for 1,100, I think 2,200 is probably a pretty good number to use. So $2,200 times the 22 head that we bought gives me a purchases of 48,400. Yeah. Throw something in the chat box if I'm losing anybody here. 160,000 minus 160,000 minus the 48,400 gives me $111,600. That is my gross product. Okay. So, or if I wanted to convert that's my gross product for 100 cows. What if I wanted for 1 per cow? Okay, that would be $1,116 per cow. That's the gross product that each cow created. $1,116. Okay. So hope you guys follow along with my math there. So we're calculating what was the value produced by those cows. Now, an interesting thing I want to point out to you here is, cowboy math on this. If you're thinking about, well, let's see, what kind of value are my cows producing? Okay, the simple thinking about it is I take my $1,500 calf and I multiply that by 92%. Right, that'd be a really easy way for somebody to just say, well, what kind of value is my cow herd producing? We take what we're getting for calves and multiply them by our weaning rate, right? So $1,500 times 0.92 is $1,380 or about $1,400. Okay, so why is my number all the way down at $1,100? Okay, that's almost $300 different. Cowboy math would tell me I'm making $1,400 a cow. But in this case, we calculated out it's closer to $1,100. Okay. So in what this is telling me, when I do the math like I just showed you guys here to do, the reason why it's almost $300 lower is we've paid for replacing those bred animals, right? We've sold off the cull animals and I bought back in bred animals in this case. Okay. So what this is telling you, it takes account cow depreciation. Some of you guys might have listened to some podcasts or done some reading about this concept of cow depreciation. Okay, if you calculate gross product, like I just showed you how to do it here, it accounts for cow depreciation. Okay, it pays for that in there. I see a question about how about the inputs needed to raise the cows. We're getting ready to go to the inputs here, just around the corner. So right now we're just calculating gross product. the value that we produced. Okay. So now the costs are going to start coming off of that. Okay. So remember that $1,116. Okay. Or you can just call it $1,100. So my gross product is $1,116 per cow. Okay. And again, I'm not showing you just to tell you guys these are your numbers. I'm just showing you how we calculate them, right? Yours are going to be different. You might have fewer dries. You might have more culls. You might have fewer opens, right? Your calves might be worth different. Your culls might be worth different. Your replacements might be worth different. But this is the way that we do the numbers. So, okay. I appreciate the questions coming in. You guys keep them going if you've got more of them. Okay. So now we're ready to start calculating costs. Okay. We're going to do direct costs. Write this up here. Direct costs. Okay. The definition of a direct cost is every time I add one more unit, this cost goes up by one. Okay. In this case, our unit is the cow. So every time we run one more cow, this unit of cost goes up by one. Okay. The first direct cost that we need to consider is the value of the money invested in the cow herd, okay, or the interest to buy the cows. So if you're borrowing money to buy the cows, you buy one more cow, you borrow one more unit of money. Okay, your interest cost goes up by one. If you own the cows, if they're all yours, then your money is invested in this cow herd. Okay. If you grow that cow herd, you're going to need to add more money to it. So there's a cost of money. So this is irrelevant if you're borrowing money or not. When we do what we're doing here is an economic analysis. Okay. So if it's the bank's money, we're going to pay the interest to the bank. If it's your money, then we're going to pay the interest to you. Okay. So it's the cost of the money. So what I've shown you here in this graph is just essentially what this cow herd is worth. If I said I've got 100 cows, and in this case, I use the number $1,800. Okay. We want to use fairly conservative numbers when we go in here, like your banker will put them on the balance sheet at a fairly conservative point. That's kind of the same thing we're doing here, right? So we were buying them at 2,200, but when they're bought, we're going to lower them on the balance sheet. So I've got $180,000 worth of cows if they're worth $1,800. And in this case, I said I also had 4 bulls to service these cows. Let's say they're worth $5,000 a piece. And then I've got $20,000 worth of bulls. Makes the math easy. My total herd of animals, if I've got 100 cows and 4 bulls, is worth $200,000, right? So another way to say that is if I didn't have these cattle, I'd have $200,000, okay? Or if I needed to buy these cattle and I didn't have the money, I'd have to go to the bank and use their money. So now we're going to charge interest on that. So I take that $200,000 worth of total investment in this cow herd, and I just picked 8%. You guys can use whatever you want to use. 8% of 200,000 is $16,000 a year, or $160 per cow in interest cost. Okay, that 160 becomes my first direct cost. Okay, so every time I add one more cow, the cost of the money goes up by one. Okay, $160 per cow. Now, the next major direct cost, and probably the largest one for most people on the call today, is going to be feed cost. Okay. So if we're feeding, let's say we're feeding hay, just to make it simple. Okay. Let's say we're feeding this cow herd hay, and now the question is going to be, how many months are these cows on hay for? Okay, I imagine the people on the call, it's going to range from probably maybe less than 30 days of hay to maybe 5 to 6 months of hay. Okay, so for the example today, I'm just going to say I'm on feed. The first feed is hay, and I'm going to say I'm on hay for 4 months for this cow, which would be about 2 tons per cow. Okay. I don't know what you guys, would somebody throw in there, what is a ton of hay worth? If you were selling hay on the open market, what are you going to value hay at? Imagine it's all over the board, but let's say like a decent quality hay. What would it be selling at? Dollars per ton? 250. Okay. 240. Great. Okay. 2 tons per cow. And I'm going to use the 250 number because it'll make the math easy. equals $500. Okay, so there's our hay cost per cow if we're feeding hay for 4 months out of the winter, and that's assuming a full ration of hay, right? Take 1 ton of hay will last a cow about 2 months, right? So if we're feeding for 4 months, then that's 2 tons per cow. Okay, we probably have some other feed costs in there other than just hay. So we might have some protein, we might have some salt and mineral. Okay, there might be a whole bunch of different things. So I'm going to throw another $50. That's probably too light, but we'll just use it for the example. Salt and mineral and protein. Okay, so my total feed cost per cow is $550 of feed. Okay, so now I've got 2 direct costs. I've got my interest cost at $160 per cow, and I've got my feed cost at $550. The other direct cost that we typically see when running cows is health or vet. So vet costs, that's going to be everything from your vaccinations to your preg checking to bangs vaccinating to treating sick animals to all those kind of things. So if I used most vet costs per cow are going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of, I would say $25 a head is going to be on the low end, all the way up to probably 75. I'll use $50 per cow in vet costs. And then we might have some marketing and trucking. Okay, so marketing would be like marketing commissions. So like when you're selling on the video, when you're selling at the sale barn, generally you're going to pay a commission. And then trucking is going to be freight, moving those animals to and from the market. So, and that's going to be all over the board as well. I'll throw another $50 in for those 2 things combined. Your numbers are going to be different than mine. So if you did any kind of AI or things like that, that would be another direct cost. Okay, in this case, we're going to assume everything is bull bred, and we've already got the bulls in our livestock inventory up there. So we're ready to do some adding. So I've got $160 per cow in interest. I've got $550 per cow in feed, and I've got another 100 if I total my vet and my marketing. So that gives me a total direct cost of $810 per cow. Okay, so there we go. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box. So total direct cost, every time I add 1 more cow, those costs, my costs are going to go up by $810 if these are my costs. Okay, one of the things I want to emphasize here, it's tempting. We see a lot of people want to take all their ranch costs and throw them on in this way, right? They want to say, well, my cost to run a cow is $1,200 a year. Well, your costs really don't work that way, right? The only costs that work that way are your direct costs. Some of those costs for your ranch are going to stay the same, right? If you've got 1 unit of labor on the ranch, and that unit of labor can take care of maybe 400 cows. Well, if you're at 200 cows and you go to 300, you're not going to necessarily hire another person, right? You're not going to go add another tractor. You're not going to go add another pickup to the ranch, right? So we want to make sure we're treating those costs correctly. Is it a direct cost or is it an overhead cost? In this case, all we're worried about are those direct costs, those costs that go up by 1. Okay. So we've now got gross product and we've got direct costs. So now we're ready for step 3, which is take the gross product minus the direct cost. Let me go back. I didn't write that down for myself. That $810 direct cost is $810. Okay. So
Dallas,
now we're ready to
Dallas, in
yes.
the Q&A, it asks about pasture. How would you calculate pasture in there?
Okay. Pasture is going to be an overhead. Okay. And hold that thought for a little bit and I'll explain why. Okay, so we only include fed feed as a direct cost. Okay, not and then everything else becomes overheads. So appreciate that. Thanks. Good question. All right. So remember gross margin. Gross margin is gross product minus direct cost is our formula for that. Our gross product was $1,116 per cow, minus our direct cost of $810. Okay. That gives me, oops, 1116 minus the 810, $306 of gross margin per cow. Okay. So what that tells me is every time I add a unit, every time I add a unit of production, in this case, a cow, I've got an additional $306 to contribute to overheads. Okay. Now let's think of what overheads are. Okay. In our definition, overheads fall into two broad categories. They are land and labor. Okay. Land and labor. So land is really going to be, it's land rent and land upkeep. Okay. So when we say land rent, what trying to think about how to not go down a rabbit hole too far. If you guys own your own ranch, then you are essentially in the land investment business, right? When you choose to buy land, what you're choosing to do is to enter into the land investment business. Okay. When you're running livestock, you're in the livestock business. Okay. We make the big distinction that being in the land business is a separate business decision from being in the livestock business. Okay. They're two very separate business decisions, and they need to be treated as separate decisions. Okay. It's not a reasonable thing to say, I'm going to go out and buy this chunk of land over here. I'm going to run cows on it and expect those cows to cash flow that land purchase. Okay. It just doesn't work that way anymore, right? We're beyond that time when economics work that way. Buying that land might be a great decision economically, right? It might be a really great place to help you build wealth. Okay. It also might make you go broke in the meantime because you can't afford to make the payments on it, right? So it's really, when you buy real estate, you're entering into a land investment business. Okay. And it's something that you do with after tax dollars. It's after profit dollars, right? When you choose to run livestock, then that business needs to kind of stand on its own 2 feet. Another way to think about this is, could you own a 100,000 acre ranch and not run one stinking cow? Okay. And obviously the answer is yes, right? You could rent that ranch to somebody else. They could take care of it. They could graze it, right? There'd still be income to your land investment. You just wouldn't be in the cattle business. And so turn that around. Could you run 1,000 cows and not even own 1 acre of land? Okay. Yeah, obviously you could. Okay. So being in the land investment is a different business decision from being in the livestock business. So when we look at livestock businesses economically, what we ask them to do is we want those livestock to rent that land at going rate. Okay. What would you rent it to somebody else for? And that's what we charge those livestock right here in terms of the land rent is that rate. Okay. What is you can call it opportunity rent of that land. Okay. And then those livestock are probably also going to have to provide some services to upkeep that ranch, right? I rent some land and I pay a land rent for the livestock I graze, but they also expect me to provide the labor to fix those fences, right? So that's what we mean by land upkeep, or the cost of keeping that ranch up. Okay. So those are 2 pieces. The labor pieces are people and things. Okay, so we break labor down into two issues. Okay, people and things. So people would be wages and other things to support people, benefits packages, housing, utilities for the houses that we often pay when we're employing people. Okay, so people are all those things together, and then things are the things that people use to do their job, to do their work. So it's going to be pickups, trailers, horses, tractors, bale beds, hay busters, all those kind of things. So because all those things ultimately do labor, right? That's the point of having those things, is to get work done. Okay, so people and things are the costs of labor. So what I want you to think about is $306 of gross margin per cow is going to service the overheads of this ranch. Okay, so if I was going to send you my cow herd, okay, and I just want you to think about this, and I said, I'm going to send you this cow, and you're going to take care of her for 12 months. You're going to calve her, you're going to feed her all winter. Okay, I'm going to buy the hay, but you're going to feed her. You're going to have all the machines to do all that work. You're going to run her all summer. You're going to wean the calves. You're going to brand the calves. And at the end of this time, I'm going to give you $306. Okay, who would sign up for that? Okay, so $306 to take care of this cow for 12 months out of the year. You have to provide all the labor. You have to provide all the machines. Okay, I provide the money for the direct costs, but everything else is on you. Okay, I bet there's probably not very many of you, right? That's at $306 a month. If I divided that by 12, 306 divided by 12, right? That's $25 a cow a month. Okay, and you've got to provide everything else. Okay, I bet most of us cannot do it for $25 a month. Okay, we probably go backwards. So the point of showing you all this, and the point of walking through this, number one is so you can figure out how to calculate gross margin for your cows. By the way, just to give you some ranges here of gross margins that I see, we just put about 500 people through the Ranching for Profit School over the last few months. So we've got to look at a lot of economics recently. A lot gross margins that we're seeing, I would say on the top end, we're seeing gross margin range from, these would be US dollars. So this is primarily what I see. $500 on the top end, and then on the bottom end is going to be negative $100. Okay, so there's a $600 swing between what different ranches are showing from a gross margin perspective. Okay. By the way, I want to play with this gross margin stuff just a little bit, because this is really, really, really important stuff. Gross margin per cow, gross margin per unit is another way to think about it. Okay. Everywhere I go and with people that ranch, they always talk about good cows, right? Oh, so-and-so's got good cows, or this is a good cow. Okay. If you're ranching for profit, if your goal is for your ranch to generate an economic return, in my opinion, there's only one way to measure a good cow, and that is with gross margin. A good cow has a strong gross margin, period. End of story. End of story. Okay. I mean, I've seen what people would traditionally define as good cows, right? Oh, she looks a certain way, right? All this kind of stuff. And she's got a gross margin of negative $100. Okay. Well, in my opinion, that's not a very good cow. Okay. I've seen some people that, it would not traditionally be defined as a good cow, right? This might be kind of a rough looking animal, but she gets the job done, right? She gets bred every year. She does it on minimum inputs. She does it with minimal assistance. And maybe she's got a gross margin of $450 a cow, right? And there's a good cow, right? She might not look like what we define as a good cow, but economically, she's a good cow. This idea of gross margin per cow in this case, or more broadly defined, gross margin per unit. Okay, gross margin per unit, that describes the economic efficiency of that enterprise. Think about that a little bit. Gross margin per unit, that describes the economic efficiency of that enterprise. How good is this thing at producing value? How good is this thing at producing value to service the overheads? If I've got a farm and I looked at gross margin per acre and I compared this crop to this crop, right? One of them has a stronger gross margin per unit, per acre. Okay? One of them is a better more economically efficient. Okay? Gross margin per unit. In ranching, for some reason, we don't talk that way. At least not normal people, not people in mainstream ranching. We don't talk gross margin per unit. We normally talk productivity, right? You normally hear a lot of talk about people say, well, my cows weaned off a 98% calf crop. Okay, well, that's pretty cool. My calves weighed $650 or 650 pounds at weaning. Well, that seems really big. It doesn't tell you anything about the profitability, the economic efficiency of that cow. Okay. She might be weaning off $650 calves, and she might have a gross margin per unit of negative $100. Okay. Just because they're productive does not mean they're profitable. Okay. They're two very different things. You see a lot of ranches that are highly productive that are losing their shirt from a profitability standpoint. Okay, we see a lot of other ranches that are marginally productive and highly profitable. Okay, so productivity and profitability are not very correlated. Okay, so we really need to start rethinking about our businesses in terms of gross margin per unit. Okay, not just productivity. So I wanted to walk you guys through this because this gross margin per unit thing, we've got a $306, in this case, gross margin per cow. Okay. I would suggest for most of you, that's probably not enough to meet your goals for what you want your ranch to do. Okay. We probably need to improve the gross margin on those cows. For example, if I was running 300 cows, okay, if I've got 300 cows and they're making $306 of gross margin per cow, that's a total gross margin of $92,000. Okay, for that $92,000, I've got to rent the ranch. I've got to pay repairs and depreciation on all the machines that are going on. I've got to pay wages for everybody that's working in there. Maybe it's even just one person working in there. What's it cost to employ one labor unit if you actually paid people a fair wage and the other fringe benefits that they expect, right? Well, you can already see that $92,000 is not going to go very far if I was running a ranch at this scale at $306 of gross margin. Okay, so my guess is that for many of you on this call, if you're running a group of cows, finding a way to improve the gross margin per unit on those cows is a big piece of it. So if we went back and looked at where our opportunities are to work on that number, okay, where is some what we call leverage points, right, to make that number stronger? Okay? It really only comes down to a few things. Okay? If I backed up here and we looked at, there's the productivity. Okay, this cow herd is really not bad. I mean, we might say, well, we could get a few more bred, right? We might say, well, we think we paid too much for these or didn't market these enough. That gross product of $1,100 per cow, that's a pretty strong gross product. I don't think there's a lot of leverage here. There's not a lot of dead wood on this page that we're looking at here. If I looked at the cost side of the equation, okay, where's the leverage there? At $160 in interest cost per cow, I'm going to make you charge that whether you owe it or not. That's an opportunity cost. That's just the time value of the money. Okay, there's not any leverage there. But what about in this fed feed stuff? There's $810 of total direct cost. 550 of that comes from feed cost. Okay, the numbers that I see, that number right there has the most variation to it from ranch to ranch, right? Some people, that number is going to be another $200 to $300 higher. Okay. Other people, that number is going to be $200 to $300 lower. Okay. So there's a lot of variation in that fed feed cost. Yeah, it's roughly $40,000 for a labor at a cattle operation. Great. I love that. I appreciate that. That would probably just be the cash wages, right? Not including the housing, the utilities, the everything else a labor unit would get. So If we added all those things in, I would suggest it's probably maybe closer to 60, 70,000 bucks. Okay. So that's why I wanted to show you guys these numbers. When we start talking about ways to winter graze and extending the grazing period, is, in my opinion, there is a lot of leverage in that number right there. Okay. Let's say we could graze, in this case, we fed hay for 4 months out of the year. Okay. Let's say we found a way to instead of grazing, feeding hay for 4 months out of the year, to graze out 2 of those months and to cut that cost down in half. Okay. There's another $250. Okay. That's going to raise our gross margin. That's going to spill right through into this gross margin thing. So instead of 306, right, we're going to be talking at $550 per cow. Okay. That's a huge improvement. So maybe you guys, maybe where you live, you don't have that much leverage there. Okay, but what if you could even just take 30 days out of that, right? There's an enormous amount of value there. It cost us about 80 bucks a ton to put up our own hay. Great. So your hay business, if hay is worth $225 a ton, then your hay business is highly profitable. Okay. If you're choosing to feed that hay to your cows, okay, you need to sell it to your cows at what you could sell it to somebody else for. Okay. When we look at a business economically, then what we do is we move those units of value that are moving. When hay is being fed to cows, it's moving from the hay business to the livestock business. When we move it from the hay business to the livestock business, we move it at market value. Okay. Otherwise, what we learn from that, if we don't do that, so let's say we moved it at 80 bucks. Okay. I've got a hay business that's making hay at 80 bucks, and I'm just going to move it right over to my cows. Okay. And they pay $80 to my hay business. So what I learned from that, if we're looking at enterprises, is I learned when I subsidize my cows with cheap hay, I can make my cows profitable, but I do so at the expense of my hay business. Okay, that's what we learned. Now, if you're meeting your goals with making hay and with running cows, who am I to tell you to do anything different? Okay, but if you're coming to your business saying, how can I make this business more profitable? Then the way I'm telling you to do it is correct. Okay, and we have to move those things at market value. So I appreciate you sharing that, Trevor, because I'm sure other people were thinking the same thing. So okay, good thing. So I want to step back away from the numbers a little bit and let's think through some things that are going to play into this. Maybe how we're going to think about some of our grazing decisions. You guys have probably heard this. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. Okay? I think we hear that a lot, and people recite that to us, right? And that's the way we think about things is our paradigms. And you hear this word tossed around quite a bit, but you don't hear it defined very often. So a paradigm, in the definition I like, is your way of seeing things. Okay? The rules of the world, the rules of the game. Okay? Those are your paradigms. Now, your paradigms can be really useful and helpful. Right? Our paradigms are our understanding of the way the world works. Right? Paradigms. But if we get stuck in a paradigm, our paradigms we can find ourselves trapped in those paradigms. Okay. And they can prevent us from seeing solutions that are sometimes right in front of us. Okay. So paradigms. I think it's fair to say that your paradigms control the actions that you take. Okay. The way you see the world, the rules of the game as you understand it, those control the things that you do. The actions that you take have a large contributing factor to the results that you get. Okay? So if we worked backwards on this, if we want different results, we need to do things differently. We need to take different actions. But before we can take different actions, we need to challenge our paradigms, to challenge the rules of the game, challenge the way things work. Okay? So this is what we do a lot at the Ranching for Profit School, is we challenge paradigms. Okay? It's not my job to change your paradigms. It's my job to push on them, okay? And to help you examine them, help you ask better questions, to really look deep at what's making me do this, what's making me take these choices. Okay? Many of the ranches that I work with, the results that they're getting are not moving their business forward, right? We see a lot of ranches that are just, you're kind of going along and yeah, things are working when prices are good, but when prices are not, man, we're going backwards, right? And that's not a way to grow a healthy business. So the results we're not very happy with. So we need to start looking at, well, what are things we can do different? What are different actions that we can take? Well, before we start examining those, we have to start at this level of paradigms. Okay. So let's look at this a little bit deeper. Okay. Paradigms around different things. One of these paradigms is I already might have challenged with you guys is this paradigm of productivity and profitability. Okay. Oftentimes people think that, but I need to have the most productive ranch I can have. Right. I've got to raise the most tons of hay. I've got to raise the most bushels. I've got to raise the biggest calf. Right. We get in this paradigm that productive is better. Okay. As we look at the actual data, the numbers behind it, what we see is the most productive ranches are never the most profitable. Okay. Never the most profitable. So, but when we start looking at changing that, sometimes we can get some real pushback. Okay. Well, what if we moved this? What if we changed this? What if instead of weaning a 96% calf crop, we were weaning an 87% calf crop? Right? We might go, I'm not interested in that at all. Well, why not? Well, because we wouldn't be profitable. Really? Hey, what if we could show you that you'd be more profitable at a lower productivity? Even then, sometimes people would not want to consider it. And that's the kind of things we're talking about when I talk about these paradigms. Okay. Paradigms about money. How about this one? Profit is to business as breathing is to life. I love this. Dave was the person who I bought Ranching for Profit from. He was a Ranching for Profit instructor for years. And he said, profit is to business as breathing is to life. Think about that. When you woke up this morning, when your eyes first woke up and you thought about what you were going to do for the day, was your first thought, oh, wonderful, another day to live so I can draw breath? Well, most of us, the purpose of life is not to breathe, right? But if we stopped drawing breath, what would happen to life? It would go away fairly quickly. The purpose of a business is not to make a profit. If that's all the purpose of a business is, it's a pretty sour business. But what you can do with that profit, right? We can grow the business, we can reinvest it, we can do off-farm investments, right? We can create opportunities for others. The purpose is not to make a profit, but what we can do with that profit is the purpose. If a business stops making a profit, what will happen to that business? At some point, now these ag businesses, we can draw this out for a long time, right? And some other businesses can draw it for long, but at some point, if a business is not profitable, it will fail. It will fail. Okay, so profit is to business as breathing is to life. So I hear a lot of people say, well, Dallas, you talk about this profit stuff. I ranch for the lifestyle. Okay, well, that's fine. We can ranch for the lifestyle if you can afford to do it. But at some point, really, if we're doing this ranching thing and it's not making a profit, then it's really not a business, is it? What do we call things we do that we contribute money to do? Okay, they're hobbies, right? So is the ranch a business or is the ranch a hobby? Okay, if you want your ranching business to continue, it better at some point make a profit, or people are going to get tired of subsidizing your hobby, which is really the fact of it. And we see a lot of this happen, right? If somebody says, well, I want my kids to carry this place on. Well, in order for them to do it, they need to come back here and work for well below market wages. And a spouse needs to work in town so we can keep the thing going. Okay. At some point, it will fail if it's not profitable. Okay. So paradigms, profit is to business as breathing is to life. So let's look at profitability statistics. Industry average in ranching, is ranching profitable? Industry average across everybody. If we just looked at the livestock business, remember I separated out the land. Okay, we're just looking at the livestock operations. The average return on assets is negative 1.5%. Okay, so if you ask the question, is ranching profitable? On average, the answer is no. Okay, no, ranching's not profitable. If you ask the question, can ranching be profitable? In our executive link program, the return on assets of the average ranch is 4.2%. So can ranching be profitable? Yes. Okay. Executive link benchmark, our top 20% in the EL program are running at 10%. So ranching can be nice profitable. Okay. But is it normally? No. Okay. So when you ranch like everybody else ranches, okay, you're going to get results like everybody else gets. Okay. So what I want to challenge you to do is we need to think about this stuff differently. We need to develop some kind of a competitive advantage and be willing to ranch weird if we're going to see it make these higher returns. Okay, so is ranching profitable? No. Can ranching be profitable? Yes. It can be very profitable. It can be a great business, but we have to look at it differently. So why isn't your ranch more profitable? Okay, I don't know the answer to that. That's for you to look at and for you to dive into. But I think there might be some leverage in the amount of fed feed and some of these harvested feeds that we're using. Okay. So I've been talking around this a little bit, but I want to jump into it a little bit different. So when we start looking at profit and economics, there's really three issues involving money. And this, the first time I heard this explained to me was when I attended Ranching for Profit. And to me, when I first learned this, it made so much sense because I'd been struggling with all these financial and economic terms that I'd heard tossed around. And I really didn't know how to put them in order and where they went. So here it is, three issues involving money. The first issue involving money is what I've been talking about a lot tonight, and that is economics. Okay, when we do an economic analysis on something, when we look at something from an economic standpoint, we're going to ask the question, is it profitable? Okay, is it profitable? When we ask the question, is it profitable, we're going to use things like opportunity cost. Okay, well, if making the hay, right? Well, if it costs me $80 to make a ton of hay and I feed it to my cows, is that the right thing to do? Okay, is it profitable? Money, it's the hay making money, right? So is it profitable? We need to figure out where that is. So when we do economics, we use like, what does it cost to replace a unit of labor? That's the number we're going to use. Not what, if you're the owner working in this, we're not going to ask, what are you drawing from the business? Okay, that's a separate question. We're going to say, what would it cost to replace the work you're doing in the business? Okay, that's the economic question. Is it profitable? It also answers the question, should I do it? Okay, is it making economic contributions? The second issue involving money is finance. Finance. So finance asks the question, can I afford to do it? Okay. So if economics is should I do it, then finance is can I afford to do it, which is questions around capital, debt, cash flow. Okay, can I afford to do it? And the third issue around money is taxes. Okay, and taxes, we think you should aspire to have tax problems. Okay, economics, finances, and taxes. Now, these three things need to go in a specific order. Okay, economics has to come first. Oops, sorry, that's supposed to be a 1. Economics has to come first. Finance will come second, and taxes comes third. Okay, so when we look at a decision, we need to come to it with the economic questions first, then come to it with the financial questions, and then we worry about the tax problems. Okay, so you have to put them in that order. Let me go into just a little bit more detail on this, okay? Because to me, I can understand why this is using. Economically, should I do it? I've got a business proposition for you. It's going to take $100,000 of capital. This pin is $100,000, okay? $100,000 of capital. And we're going to, let's say we're going to go buy some heifers or something right now, right? And at the end of the year, so let's say even say 10 months from now, we're gonna have $200,000. So I'm going to take our $100,000 and we're going to double our money, $200,000. economically, is this profitable? Okay, well, that's 100% return. Yeah, you bet. Economically, that's profitable. Okay, assuming I've included all my costs in there, right? So there's the economic question. We've done that economic analysis. Financially, what's the financial question? Where the heck are we going to come up with $100,000? And if it takes $100,000 to get started, and then I have to feed these things for 10 months before I get to turn it into $200,000, is this something I can afford to do? Right? Can I cash flow this? Do I have the capital source to do this? Okay, so economically, should I do it? Financially, can I afford to do it? Okay, and then after we've made all of our stinking money, then we worry about if we should manage the tax problems. Okay. How do most ranchers, what order do they put these three things in? Okay. Economics, finances, and taxes. Most ranchers put them in absolutely the opposite order. Okay. We manage our business with tax avoidance oftentimes as a priority. Okay. Well, getting close to tax season, maybe I should buy something so I don't have to pay any tax, right? Well, that's fine as long as that thing will make the tax problem worse next year, right? But most time we buy things that don't make it worse next year, right? So economics, finances, and taxes, 1, 2, and 3. So make sure we put them in that order. So, all right, starting to feel like I'm talking to myself in here. Everybody alive out there in land? So how are we doing? Guys ready for me to keep going? All right, let's keep on rolling. All right, thanks, Matt. Appreciate somebody being alive. Okay. All right. Thanks, Robert. Rachel. Strategies to improve profit. So as we start looking at these, when we break down businesses, here's things we often see. And I just want to share this with you guys, and then we're going to transition to a conversation on winter grazing and open it up for questions. So when we get the economic analysis done on businesses, oftentimes, so just about every farmer ranch has multiple different enterprises going on, right? We might run cows, but we also might be in the heifer development business. We also might be in the haymaking business, right? We might also run yearlings. We might have a direct marketing business, right? We have all these different enterprises going on that we call our ranch. Okay, when we look at these things, when we break them apart economically, it's not at all uncommon for us to find enterprises that are consistently not working, enterprises that are making an economic loss, right? So maybe it's the cows that are making an economic loss, right? Maybe nobody's attached to the cows. We just have cows because we think we should, right? Well, heck, let's get rid of the cows if that's the case. Maybe it's the heifer development, right? Maybe people are thinking, well, I was always been told I have to raise my own heifers that fit my environment. And when we actually look at the numbers, what we're seeing is it's costing us way more to raise those heifers than what we could just buy them on the open market for, right? So maybe we need to look at outsourcing those heifers and then think about all the implications that come with that. Okay. So strategy number 1 is to stop enterprises that are consistently not working. Okay. Intuitively, it makes sense. Putting that into practice can be pretty hard though, right? Because again, it goes back to this paradigm thing. Well, I think I should be doing this. Well, what about that time back in 1860 when this happened, right? And so then there's all these conversations around that. Strategy number 2 is to improve marginal enterprises, okay? So once we've gotten rid of the things that are losing money, then let's look at those things that are just marginal. Okay, and this analysis that we did tonight on these cows, I would call those cows a marginal enterprise, right? They're just barely working. I mean, they're making some contributions to overheads, but really not very many. So then we come to that cow herd and we say, okay, how can we make this better, right? What are our leverage points to make this a stronger enterprise, to improve the gross margin per unit, okay? And then the third thing is, let's hit the gas on the enterprises that are working. Okay. Just like we often find enterprises that are losing money, when we look at a ranch economically, there's often something in there that's working really well. Okay, so then we say, okay, hey, this piece is working. How can we do more of that, right? With our existing set of overheads, with our skills, how can we find ways to do more of this thing that's actually good at creating value? Okay. And then that last piece is having the courage to act. Okay? And that can be a hard thing to do, especially in multi-generation branches where we're working with family, and somebody's role might be that enterprise that's not working, right? Well, if the hay business is losing money and Billy's in charge of the hay business, right? Well, what's Billy going to do? Okay. So a lot of those kind of questions that come into that. So that's where things can get sticky. So I want to transition to winter strategies. So with the segue of improving marginal enterprises. So in this case, those cows we looked at were a marginal enterprise. And so what are some leverage points? And we zeroed in on that amount of fed feed, okay, as we looked at for these winter strategies. So we're going to go through some things like this. It seems kind of silly to me to be a guy from Wyoming talking to a bunch of Canadians about how to get through a tough winter, right? Because you guys have a lot more winter than we do, although we can get it sometimes, right? So, but keep in mind, these are things that we've learned from working with people across cow country, and a lot of people that do winter in some very, very heavy winter environments. So these things have a lot of broad application. So number one, as we looked at that ranch that we looked at, one of the biggest things that we see that causes cow businesses to have a unexciting gross margin is this stuff right here. Okay. The feed, and particularly hay. Okay. There's a really strong correlation. In fact, when I worked for the University of Wyoming, I did databases, right, where we had everybody's economic data set, and we had hundreds of ranches that we would look at, and we would look for places where there's strong correlations between high profit and low profit groups. Okay. And I've seen this from other people as well that run these types of data sets. In a cow-calf business, the number one correlated number with profit is how much hay is fed per cow. Okay. Hands down. The number one correlated number with profit is the amount of fed feed per cow. Okay. The ranch that tends to put more fed feed into a cow is almost always less profitable than the ranch that can do it with a cow grazing on her own. Okay. I'm not going to tell you that's a recipe to run a profitable ranch. Right? I'm giving you kind of broad correlations, right, of what the data shows. There's always exceptions. There are ranches out there that are feeding a lot of feed and are profitable. Okay. So I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just telling you that the data says that most of the ranches that feed a lot of feed are much less profitable than those ranches that can do it without. Okay. And I think this is the biggest piece of it. It's not just the cost of the feed. Okay. The cost, we were using $250 a ton. That's pretty expensive hay. But it's not just the cost of the feed. What else is it? It's the cost of the feeding. Okay. Think about it this way. If we went, there's a ranch that we work with that runs about 1,000 head of cows up in Gillette, Wyoming. This is northern Wyoming. We're right on the border of Wyoming and Montana. Okay. That ranch has been running cows for 30 plus years. In those 30 plus years, they have never, ever fed hay to cows. Okay. It's just not the way they do it. Okay. Those cattle are grazing out year round. I'm not telling you this to say this is the way you should do it. Okay. I'm just saying that this is an example. So 1,000 cow ranch that doesn't ever feed hay. Okay. When you drive to their ranch headquarters and you pull in their yard, right, it looks very different when you look around at the stuff they have versus a 300 cow ranch that feeds hay for 5 months out of the winter. Okay, when you drive into that 300 cow ranch that feeds hay for 5 months out of the winter, there's a much bigger pile of stuff sitting around in order to move feed and to put feed in front of cows. Okay? So that's probably the bigger piece of it. It's not just the cost of the feed, it's the cost of the feeding. Yeah, and Matt, you're right. The diesel's a part of it, right? But it's also the people. And in this case, this is a horses and wagon. That's pretty cheap, but it's normally not that, right? It's normally probably $300,000 worth of stuff running around out there to get this job done. Okay, so it's not just the cost of the feed, it's the cost of the feeding. And that's why I think that number that I told you is so highly correlated with profit. Okay, it's not just the hay, but it's all the stuff to put it out. So I want to challenge you guys, if you want to run a profitable ranch, is to select enterprises that will allow the animals to harvest their own feed 90 to 100% of the time. There are probably windows when we can provide some substitute feed and do so profitably. Okay, but we want those times to be kept to a minimum and more exceptions than the rules. Okay. So if you're going to tell me that, well, Dallas, you don't understand, we ranch in deep snow country, there's 3 feet of snow on the ground for 6 months out of the year. Okay. I'm probably going to say, well, great, that might be a great place to ranch. It's probably not a very good place to run a year-round breeding herd. It probably just doesn't make sense. Okay. So this brings me to the second point is, oops, sorry, we'll come back to that one. To match the enterprise to the environment and match the production schedule to the seasons. You might want to take a picture of that slide. There's a lot said in those few words. Match the enterprise to the environment. That's another way of saying what I just said, right? If you ranch in country where there is 3 feet of snow on the ground for 6 months out of the year, it probably doesn't make sense to run a year-round breeding herd there. Maybe you could find something seasonal to do, right? Maybe there's seasonal livestock enterprises. We had those cows making $300 over a 12-month season. What if you could find an enterprise that made $400 gross margin in 6 months? Okay. So that means in half the time you make more margin. Right? That's twice as profitable. Okay. So there probably are things you could do. And it doesn't mean yearlings, right? Every time I say that, everybody thinks, well, it's got to be yearlings. No, I mean, yearlings might be a part of it, but there's probably 12 or 15 other things you could do besides just yearlings. Because I know a lot of people don't like running yearlings. Yearlings have their own downsides, right? Everything has its downsides. But it could be more than just yearlings. Match the production schedule to the seasons. If you're running a breeding herd, it means calve with nature. Okay, that's just another way of saying it. That calving season should match up with the seasonal cycle of the forage. And oftentimes what that means is we want those animals to be grazing green growing feed for 30 days before they have their young. And that's usually a good place because then we can ask those animals to shed some weight in the wintertime. We have an opportunity to put that weight back on coming out of spring, and then we're having those calves born. And that's generally, but you look at the wildlife populations, that's generally how they do it, is about 30 to 45 days after green up is when those animals start having their babies. Okay. So match the production schedule to the seasons, match the enterprise to the environment. Okay. One important thing on that calving season piece, I get a lot of people that say, well, we've done it this way for so long and it's worked, right? And who am I to challenge that? But what I want to say is there probably was a time in the not too distant past when that did make sense. Okay? And you think about what prices have done. What have the price of calves done relative to the inputs that it takes to calve in the wintertime? And those inputs really are feed, labor, and machines. So what is your cost of a unit of labor? What's your cost of a unit of machine? And what's your cost of a unit of feed? What have those things done over the last 20 years versus what is the value of a calf done? And so oftentimes those inputs have gone up way, way, way at a much more rapid pace than the value of the calves that we're producing. Okay, so where that economics might have worked, I don't see very many examples of where they work anymore. And again, there's not a recipe, just something to think about. Okay, so match the enterprise, the environment, production schedule to the seasons. Let's go back to this one. If we're going to winter graze, there must be adequate residue to graze. I think these cows are up in BC. The picture of these black cows with their heads in the snow. I think these are the BC cows, one of our alumni ranches. What this means is that the breeding stock should match the winter carrying capacity. Yeah. So what I'm saying there is, if you're going to decide you're going to run a year-round breeding herd, the stocking rate of that year-round breeding herd should be set not at your summer carrying capacity, but at your winter carrying capacity. Okay, how many animals can we comfortably graze through the winter 8 years out of 10? Okay, and that's probably the stocking rate that you should set for that breeding herd, for that year-round herd. Okay, that excess of forage that you're going to have in the spring, maybe, or in the summer, maybe that's where you've got a group of flex animals coming in and using that. Okay, but we have to match our stocking rate to our carrying capacity for the winter carrying capacity. And that means that there'll be some residue to graze, something left underneath there. We don't want the run out. The last bite of forage off the ranch was taken November 1st, right? There's no way we're going to graze through the winter when it's all been used up. Okay. So there's some thoughts on winter grazing and some strategies to do that. If you let the dog manage the ranch, the dog would just assume you fed hay. So I've just about met my time. I want to leave you guys with some things before we jump into the Q&A session. If you never do the hard thing, life will be hard. But if you'll do the hard thing, life can be easier, I would say. Easier. The easy thing is just keep doing what you've always done, right? We're not going to give any thought. We're just going to go out there and keep doing what we always. That's the easy thing. Okay, if we do the easy thing, life is going to be hard. But if we'll do the hard thing, and some of these things, running these margins, thinking about what are ways we can improve the business, those can be hard things. If we'll learn to do the hard things, then life can be easier. Okay? So if we can have a role in helping you guys explore this stuff, we'd love to do so. This is a snapshot of our website. There's a lot of free ways to interact with us. If you go to our website, ranchingforprofit.com, you can sign up for our newsletter that comes out twice a month. It's called Profit Tips. Just put your email in there. It'll be delivered to your email. We usually write on a variety of business management topics. We've got a video series that delivers to your email. It's 10 videos walking through lessons from the school. You can sign up for those. That's free to sign up for. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, social media. With these two books, the Turnaround Book and Healthy Lands, Happy Families, you can buy those on our website. These are really good books. This is Dave Pratt. He's the author of those two books. They're really exceptional books written on ranching. So if you'd like to get a copy of those. And if you haven't taken Ranching for Profit, we'd love to have you come to a school. And if you've already taken it, you can repeat at a substantially discounted price. And then, of course, we have the Executive Link program, which is available to alumni of the school. There's the books. Here is one more thing I want to tell you about before I give you the school schedule. We're doing this will be our 4th year of doing Ranching for Profit for young adults. This is the group we had last year. It was 54 young people, ages 18 to 25, from 17 U.S. states and 3 countries. I think we had 4 or 5 from Canada. There was mostly Albertans, and there was a girl from Vancouver that was there as well. If you know young people that would benefit to this, we do this at a ranch, northern Wyoming, southern Montana. It's a camp out, so we camp out in tents. We have a caterer that comes and cooks for us. There's shower houses and bathrooms there, but we go for 4 days. So it's June 11 to 15th. And the tuition for that is $750. And I looked right before I came on the webinar, we're at 34 people already signed up. So there's 20 spots left for that. So if you know some young people that would benefit from being a part of that, you might check it out. And there's pictures of the young adults last summer doing that. So it's we spend half a day talking about ranch management stuff, and then we spend the second half a day outside on a ranch with those ranchers. They got bottom left picture there is Trey Patterson on the Padlock Ranch. That's a really neat ranch, and Trey's an exceptional manager, taking us around that place. Here's the upcoming Ranch and Profit schools. And I see your question about when are we coming back to Alberta. So you see there about the fourth one down. We'll be back at Okotoks November 26th through December 2nd. You get signed up for that school by reaching out to the Foothills Forage Association. It's their school. We're just coming up and teaching it for them. So if you'd like to get into that one, last year we had 48 in the school and there were 34 on the waiting list, and they were going to let those on the waiting list. So I think they've done that now, but I bet you there's probably only a dozen seats left. So you might reach out sooner rather than later if you want to come to that Okotoks school. We've got a couple schools coming up this spring that are already filled up. We'll be up in Kennewick, Washington in September, Abilene, Texas, Phoenix, Arizona. I actually added that Phoenix, Arizona school thinking a lot of Canadians would enjoy going down there in December, but it hasn't worked out that way. So, but I think it'd be a great school to go to. It's not necessary to go to a school in your geographic region. In fact, I think you'll actually have a better experience if you go to a school outside of your geographic region. So anyway, I've covered what I wanted to cover. So I'm looking forward to opening it up for some Q&A and diving into this stuff with you guys.
Thank you, Dallas. If anybody has any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box.
There's also the webinar next week. So if people want to think on their questions, they can bring them also to next week.
Interest on each cow. All right, let me jump into that one. So remember what we're doing when we do this is an economic analysis, right? So we're looking at all the different ways that value is created or costs occur. Okay, so when you own a cow herd, in the example of this cow herd I used, it was 100 head of cows and some bulls, and they were worth about $200,000, right? So if I own that cow herd, let's say I don't have any borrowed money, that's my money. What I'm essentially saying is I'm letting this cow herd tie up $200,000 of my capital. Okay, there is value in that money. There's time value to money. Right, I wouldn't let you have $200,000 of my capital and not expect to be paid interest. So why would I let my cows have $200,000 of my capital and not be expected to pay interest? Okay, so what we do is we charge an opportunity interest on the capital invested in the cow herd. And in the example I gave, it was I think 8%. I think it was $16,000 a year on that $200,000. So that's what we're getting at. Yes, right. It's on the inventory value. You got it. Rachel's asking how we got to $810 per cow. That was $810 of direct cost. I just took all my notations off. I'm sorry, Rachel. Let me see if I can bring up a share screen, a whiteboard. Here we go. Okay. So we got to $810 of direct cost per cow. The first one was interest, okay, which was, I think it was the $16,000 for 100 cows or $160 per cow in interest cost. There was feed, okay, in our case it was $500 of hay and $50 of salt and mineral, so that was $550, okay, in fed feed. And then there was vet costs of $50. And then there was marketing and trucking costs of $50. And does that do it? 550, 650. Yep. $810 of direct cost. $810 of direct costs per cow. Okay. So what that means is if I decided I wanted to add one more cow to that herd, my costs to running that cow are going to go up $810 if these are my costs. Now your costs are probably different. And so something to consider there. All right, Daryl, in a mixed farming and ranching operation, how do you break out equipment costs that would be used in both enterprises, such as a loader tractor? That's a good question, Daryl. Let me show you how we do it. Back to my whiteboard. I like the whiteboard, obviously, don't I? Okay. How do we clear this? Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we'll work with the second half we got here. I don't know how to erase it. Maybe it's going to let me do it if I do that. There we go. Try that one more time. Okay. All right. Okay. This is a little bit of a long answer here. Let me give you an example ranch that this ranch, the first thing we're going to do is divide this ranch into divisions. Okay. This is a ranch that runs cows, runs stockers, and makes hay. Okay. This ranch had in the divisions. When I say divisions, it's like, in this case, it would be livestock and farming. Okay. Under the livestock division, there are different enterprises. Okay. In the livestock division, there's cows and stockers. Maybe in the farm division, maybe there's hay and grain. Okay. So that's the way we're going to break these things down. In our cows, we're going to have a gross product, direct costs, and calculate a gross margin. Okay. Same thing in the stockers. We're going to calculate the gross product, the direct cost, calculate out a gross margin. Okay. We're going to add these two gross margins together. Let's say we had $100,000 of gross margin here and $50,000 of gross margin here. When we add those two together, our livestock division has a divisional gross margin of $150,000. Okay. We do the exact same thing for our hay and our grain. And let's say the farming division gross margin is, so this is another divisional gross margin. Let's say it's $300,000. Okay. Now, this is where your question comes in. Right down here, we're going to have what we call divisional overheads. Okay, divisional overhead. So I'm going to have divisional overheads for my livestock division and divisional overheads for my farming division. Okay, so another group of divisional overheads. Now, the test of a divisional overhead is, if I stopped doing this division, would this cost go away? Okay, that's the test. Okay, so if it passes that test, it's a divisional overhead. If it doesn't pass that test, then it is a business overhead. Okay. So when we have an overhead cost, like a loader tractor, we've got three, in this example, we've got three buckets we can dump it into. Okay, I can dump it into the livestock division overhead bucket. I can dump it into the farming division overhead bucket, or when in doubt, I dump it into the business overhead bucket. Okay. So if I've come, let's say I'm looking at my stock trailer. Okay. I've got overheads on my stock trailer, right? If I did not run livestock, would I have a stock trailer? Right? Probably not. Okay. So my stock trailer is a livestock division overhead. I've got my combine. Okay, and my overhead, my combine has overhead associated with it. If I did not have a farm, would I have a combine? Probably not, right? So that combine is a farm division overhead. Okay, now here's your loader tractor. I've got my loader tractor. If I did not have a farm, would I keep my loader tractor? Well, let's see. I use it to load silage, to feed that group of cows. I use it to clear the road. Yes, I would have a loader tractor. Okay, so where does the loader tractor go? Do I divide that loader tractor in half and charge half to the livestock and half to the cows? No, I don't do that. I dump that loader tractor 100% entirely into business overheads. Okay, we're a bit different in how we teach people to do this than most. A lot of universities teach people to fire up a metal chainsaw and to cut that loader tractor in half and to charge half of its overheads to the livestock and half of its overheads to the farm. Don't do that. You get bad information, because if you do that, let's say you do that and it looks, and that livestock division says, well, when I put half of my overheads over there, there's not making any money. I'm losing money. So I should stop running livestock. Well, those overheads don't go away, right? Their costs continue to happen, right? That loader tractor depreciates the same every year if it's being shared with livestock and farming. Doesn't matter. So you get bad information when you allocate overheads. Okay, what you want to do is you want to take those overheads and leave them together and just put them in the right bucket. Okay, so anything that's shared on the farm or ranch goes into business overheads. All family labor goes into business overheads. All housing, all ranch upkeep costs go into business overheads. The things that really generally get divided up are machines. Okay. Machines and specific labor. Like if you have a cowboy on staff, right, their wages can go into the livestock division overhead. Okay, but for the most part, most of our labor goes right into the business overheads. So hope that helps. Sorry for the long answer.
That was a great answer.
Thank you.
We do have a few more questions that have come in the Q&A.
Okay.
So Guy asks, when you talked about keeping the herd to the carrying capacity of the forage on the ranch, does that include crops specifically seeded to forage in the winter grazing?
Yeah, good question. I would say the answer would be yes. So yeah, if you're planting cover crops for winter grazing or crops for grazing that, then you're going to have an estimated carrying capacity of those fields. So that would be part of that winter grazing plan.
How is next week's webinar going to be different, or is it going to be different?
I would like to hear from you guys. What would you like to dive into? We've got a whole bunch of information we can go into. I thought about maybe we could dive into more some of the nuts and bolts of the grazing stuff. We teach a lot on the grazing principles and how we can apply those for winter grazing. So yes, it's going to be different. For one thing, I can't stand to talk about the same thing twice. I get bored. So, but yeah, if you guys have specific things you'd like to hear from, I'd be happy to incorporate those.
I mean, on a personal note, I think diving into the specifics of grazing principles and how you can apply them to winter grazing is awesome. That'd be really great to hear. We do have a few more questions. So Matt asks, how can you support the nutritional needs of a cow for 6 months of winter with stockpile grass with poor energy and protein, as well as warming and cooling cycles that can produce ice crusts on the snow?
Yeah, it's a good question, Matt. And I don't think every environment can do that. There's some environments that's probably just not a practical thing to ask from it. However, just about everywhere we work, somebody says, well, you can't do that here. And you look down the road and somebody's been doing it for the last 20 years, right? So I think the answer is I don't know that I can sit here and explain all the specifics of how we can support the nutritional needs of that cow, but I think we can start saying that what can be done. What are other people doing how are others that are getting out of the fed feed and harvested feed, right? How are they finding ways to fill those holes? I was talking about that ranch that's up in Gillette, Wyoming, and that there's several of them around, but that one's just coming to mind. I was just talking to those guys last week, and so they've got a cow herd that's been developed on that place, right? Those cows are essentially used to working for a living all winter long. They know how to go forage when everything else is standing at the gate bellowing. They have a lot of hillsides that get blown off in the wintertime. So even, when there's snow on the ground and it's cold, there's exposed forage for them to eat. And then they plan their grazing accordingly, right? And I imagine they probably have some competitive advantages with the type of plants that they have that hold forage quality pretty long into the winter. But yeah, I don't know that I'll have a better answer than that for you for all the different examples.
John asks, have you calculated any forms of winter grazing that is cheaper for overhead, example, corn, swath grazing, etc., and increases gross margin per cow?
Calculated any forms of winter grazing that is cheaper for overhead? So we have quite a few clients that do a lot of crop aftermath grazing. And those oftentimes work very well. We really need to think about considering all the different costs in those things. So for a lot of people, it involves hauling cows several hundred miles to where crop grazing can happen. Oftentimes developing water on places that are not currently watered to support that winter grazing there. I don't really know that I can give you forms for calculating those. I think it's more of a case by case basis of just thinking through, right? What are my total cost of moving this animal to this type of feed source, developing the infrastructure that'll support it, and getting that back, and does this make sense with my total scheme? One of the things that we often look at when we look at an economics of a situation are we often run three scenarios. So the one that I might have showed you guys today would be like, okay, what do we expect to happen, right? What's most likely? Okay, oh, well, 2 cows will die, 10 are going to be open. Okay, so there's our most likely scenario. Then what might be a worst case scenario, right? If things went badly, what could happen? And then what might be a really nice scenario? Okay, if things went well, what might happen? So what we essentially end up with is a fence, right? A worst case, most likely, and a best case. And with that information in hand, I think it gives a lot more security in making some of these kind of decisions, right? Sometimes we see things where, okay, we know what's going on now. What if we change this and it went poorly? Sometimes the worst case of something new is better than the existing, if that makes sense. And that takes a lot of uncertainty out of doing some of these decisions if we can run the numbers that way.
Brett says, the guys and gals at Union Forge claim to graze through the winter here in central and northern Alberta with cover crops and bale grazing, cows calving in May.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'm in agreement with that. It probably makes some sense. So, yep, we got to consider that production cycle, that production season. How do we match those animals to that environment? So.
Give us your best cow joke.
Oh gosh. I'm terrible. I'm good at dad jokes, right? And my daughter would be super embarrassed if I said something now. I think my best cow jokes are probably not appropriate.
Does anybody have any other questions? If you would like to speak and explain your question or whatever, just raise your hand and I can unmute you and allow you to talk if you would like to do that.
just curious, those of you that are still on the call, throw like a thumbs up in the chat if you're an alumni of the Ranching for Profit School. I'd like to know how many alumni we have on tonight. Oh, cool. Thanks, Robert. 1998. All right. That must have been a Stan Parsons or a Dave Pratt school, I'm guessing. So. They were both there. Very good. All right. Cool, Matt. Looking forward to meeting you in Kennewick in September. So. Well, Megan, I think we might have worn them out, huh? Oh, we got a 2004 grad in there. And Robert's coming to Okotoks. Nice. Sign up for the Alberta School. You get a hold of the Foothills Forage Association, and they're taking care of registrations for that. So I would encourage you to do that soon rather than later. Last year it filled up really quick. So call them tomorrow.
If you send us an email, we can get you in touch with the folks at Foothills Forage.
Thank you, Megan.
Perfect. Well, we're really looking forward to hearing you next week, and I think it'll be a good mesh of topics.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. If somebody has some ideas of things you'd like for me to cover next week, send them to Megan or Kelly, and they'll get them on to me, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody again next week.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, and have a good evening.